The flight was progressing smoothly, the hum of the engines and the soft murmurs of passengers filling the cabin. People were settling into their routines, some flipping through magazines, others lost in their phones. The crew moved with the grace of experience, expertly gliding through their duties. Then, without warning, a loud slap cracked through the tranquility, shattering the calm. Gasps echoed from the first-class cabin, eyes turning toward the source of the commotion. The passengers looked on, stunned. The flight attendant stood frozen, her hand still hanging in the air, chest rising and falling with rapid, furious breaths. Before her, an older man remained unmoved, his face calm as he tightened his grip around the handle of his cane. She had crossed a line, humiliated him, dismissed him, laid her hands on him. But what she didn't know was that she had just made a grave mistake, a mistake that would cost her far more than she could ever imagine. By the time the plane touched down, her career would be in ruins. But before we continue this story, take a moment to comment below and let us know where you're watching from today. And if you enjoy stories like this, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you never miss out on our latest tales. The airport was alive with activity, a sea of travelers rushing to their gates as overhead announcements crackled through the terminals. Amidst the chaos, one figure moved with deliberate calm. Kalen RHS, a man well accustomed to airports and flights, walked with steady steps, his cane tapping softly on the polished tile floor. His broad shoulders and upright posture made him appear stronger than his years suggested, yet the stiffness in his left leg betrayed the injury he had carried for years, one that never fully healed, a silent reminder of his time in the military. He wasn't in a rush. He'd taken countless flights in his lifetime, but this one felt different. This time, he wasn't just another faceless passenger. As he reached the boarding gate, he handed over his ticket to the young attendant Emily Grant, offering her a polite nod. She barely spared him a glance as she scanned his ticket. Her smile rote and practiced, one she had given to countless first-class passengers. There was no recognition in her eyes. That was fine. Kalen wasn't looking for attention. He only wanted one thing, a quiet flight. Walking toward the first-class cabin, Kalen adjusted the strap of his small travel bag. The plush seats were already occupied by passengers, some sipping drinks, others absorbed in their phones. The air was thick with the aroma of freshly brewed coffee, and the hum of idle conversation filled the space. When he reached his seat, he set down his bag and prepared to sit, only to be interrupted by a sharp voice cutting through the air. "Sir, I think you're in the wrong section." Kalen turned to see the flight attendant, Veronica Hale, standing in the aisle, her hand on her hip, her clipboard held like a weapon. She was tall, her uniform pristine, and her blonde hair styled to perfection. But it was her gaze that struck him, cold, dismissive, as if she had already decided that he didn't belong here. He remained composed, his voice calm as he responded. "No, I believe this is my seat." Veronica's lips pressed into a thin line. She gave him a slow, appraising look, her eyes flicking over his worn leather jacket, the cane resting against the seat, the deep lines on his face. Her gaze lingered on his ticket, but she didn't take it. "This section is reserved for first-class passengers," she said, her tone sharper this time. Kalen suppressed a sigh, but his voice remained even as he responded. "I know. That's why I have a first-class ticket." Veronica's eyes darted to the ticket, but instead of taking it, she crossed her arms, her voice loud enough for the surrounding passengers to hear. "These seats are for premium guests. If you were upgraded by mistake, I can help you find a seat in economy." A few passengers glanced up from their screens, some pretending not to notice, while others watched in tense curiosity. Kalen's grip on his cane tightened, but he kept his tone steady. "There's no mistake. This is my seat." Veronica let out a small, impatient sigh, snatching the ticket from his hand without looking at it. She skimmed over the details, and for a moment her expression faltered. But instead of apologizing, she handed it back, her tone curt. "Do you have any proof of purchase? Or did someone else buy this for you?" The implication was clear. She didn't believe he could afford the seat. Kalen's jaw clenched, but before he could speak, Veronica yanked the ticket away again, her patience finally wearing thin. "Sir, I need you to move now. You're holding up the boarding process." Gasps filled the cabin, the tension palpable. A businessman seated nearby, Nathan Carter, frowned and muttered under his breath, "Man, you don't have to treat him like that." But Veronica ignored him. She was too focused on Kaylin. Then, before anyone could react, she did the unthinkable. In one swift motion, she slapped him. The sound rang out, sharp and resounding like a crack of thunder. For a moment, everything froze. The entire cabin was silent. A woman in the front row, Lena Whitmore, gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. A man farther back muttered, "What the hell?" A flight attendant near the galley, Noah Reed, turned his head sharply. Kaylin didn't flinch. He didn't move. He didn't touch his face. He simply stared at her, unblinking. In that moment, everything changed. The power Veronica thought she had over him evaporated. She had no idea who she had just struck. A heavy silence settled over the cabin, thick with tension. Passengers exchanged uneasy glances, unsure of what they had just witnessed. Some shifted uncomfortably in their seats, while others openly stared, eyes flicking between Kaylin and Veronica. But Kaylin remained still, unmoved, unshaken. He had fought in wars, seen men break under pressure, survived situations far worse than this. A slap from an arrogant flight attendant didn't even make him blink. Veronica, on the other hand, was still holding on to her misplaced sense of superiority. Her face twisted with irritation, as though she were the victim. "Sir, I won't ask again," she snapped. "Get up and move to economy before I call security." Nathan Carter, seated just ahead, turned fully toward the scene, his disbelief palpable. "This is unbelievable," he muttered. "The man has a ticket, and you—" He stopped, shaking his head in disbelief. "You can't just put your hands on a passenger." Veronica shot him a glare, her voice cold and dismissive. "Stay out of this. This doesn't concern you." Noah Reed, the younger flight attendant, hovered nervously near the galley. His fingers twitched by his side, uncertain whether to intervene. He had seen Veronica act cold toward passengers before, but this was something else. It was about to escalate into something much worse than just a seating dispute. Kaylin exhaled slowly, his grip on his cane steady. His voice was calm, but there was an unmistakable steel edge to it. "You should think carefully about what you're doing next." For a moment, Veronica hesitated, but then with a determined glare, she squared her shoulders and reached for his cane. Kaylin's grip tightened instantly, his voice dropping dangerously low. "Don't." The force of that single word made her flinch. The shift in power was sudden and undeniable. The passengers around them could sense it, the air thickening with the change in atmosphere. A woman in 3C whispered to her husband, "She's making a huge mistake." Just then, the intercom crackled, and a deep voice filled the cabin, commanding authority. "M. Hale, report to the cockpit immediately." Veronica's expression faltered. She froze for a moment, uncertainty flickering in her eyes, but quickly masked it as she turned toward the front of the plane with a sharp huff. As she marched away, Noah stepped cautiously toward Kaylin. "Sir, are you all right?" he asked softly. Kaylin leaned back in his seat, brushing non-existent dust off his sleeve. His voice was even, controlled. "I'm fine. But she won't be—" Nathan Carter, his gaze fixed on the cockpit, leaned in. "She's about to find out exactly who she just messed with." Now, Kaylin wasn't just another passenger, and Veronica's fate was sealed. She had no idea that this flight would turn into the worst day of her career. Everything felt off balance, as if the universe had shifted its weight and left her on the wrong side. Veronica's mind replayed the last few moments in a loop, each sound and image burning into her memory. The hushed whispers of the passengers, the cold dismissiveness in Kaylin's voice when he rejected her forced apology. It was all too much. She had never been in this position before. Veronica was the one in control. She was the one who called the shots, who dictated the rules, who decided who deserved what treatment. Yet now she was the one being humiliated. Reed, the younger flight attendant, lingered near the galley, his arms crossed tightly over his chest. He looked at her, hesitated for a moment, and then spoke. That didn't go well, did it? Veronica shot him a sharp look, her jaw tightening. Not now, Reed. Noah, standing a few feet away, didn't back down. I told you earlier, you should have left that man alone. She let out a bitter laugh, shaking her head. Oh, so you think you have all the answers now? Her voice was low, venomous, as she gestured toward the curtain that separated first class from the rest of the cabin. Men like him don't belong in those seats. You don't just... She stopped herself, biting back harsher words. Noah's expression hardened, his tone icy. Men like him? He repeated, his voice cold yet controlled. You mean decorated veterans? The kind who've served this country, who've given everything, and probably have more money than you'll ever see in your lifetime. Veronica's grip on her tray tightened, her hands trembling slightly. She clenched her jaw, trying to hold back the wave of frustration rising within her. I don't need a lecture from you. Noah stepped closer, his gaze unwavering. You think you're untouchable. But I saw Grayson Langley's face on that screen, and believe me, you're not walking away from this. Her hands curled into fists at her sides. She wanted to snap back to put him in his place, but deep down, she knew he was right. Her knees felt weak, and she turned away, reaching for a tray of drinks to distract herself. She could feel Noah's eyes on her as she tried to steady herself, but it was as if the weight of everything crashing down around her was too much to bear. You should prepare yourself, Noah said quietly, his voice soft but filled with gravity. Veronica didn't answer. She could barely comprehend his words, her mind fixated on the undeniable reality that was settling into her chest like a stone. She had spent years building her reputation, commanding this cabin with precision and authority, but now she was the one being scrutinized, the one under judgment. She squeezed her eyes shut for a moment, trying to block out the suffocating reality, the whispers, the judgmental stares from her crew. Each of them was waiting, watching, as if her downfall was inevitable. She caught a glimpse of Noah from the corner of her eye. He wasn't gloating. No, it wasn't that. It was something else, something that twisted in her gut. Pity. And Veronica hated that more than anything. She didn't need pity, she needed a way out. For a fleeting second, she considered calling corporate herself. Trying to get ahead of whatever storm was coming. Maybe if she spun the situation, made it sound like a misunderstanding, they'd be lenient. But as her hand reached for her phone, the in-flight system chimed. Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. The voice echoed through the cabin, immediately silencing the low hum of the passengers. We've received updated instructions from corporate regarding a seating matter in first class. Flight crew, please ensure all passengers remain in their assigned seats. Veronica's fingers froze around her phone. This wasn't a normal announcement. She could feel it, the weight of it. It wasn't about safety or procedure. It was about her. And she could feel the consequences settling in, like a vice slowly tightening around her chest. Noah glanced at her, his voice barely above a whisper. I think that was meant for you. She glared at him, fury bubbling up. I don't need you hovering over me. Noah rubbed his temples, a sigh escaping his lips. Look, I know you think you can fix this, but you can't. You crossed a line, and now you're just waiting for the consequences. Veronica narrowed her eyes. You don't know that, but even as she said it, she knew he was right. Her confidence faltered, and deep down she understood. The moment that plane landed, her career would never be the same. Meanwhile, in first class, Kalen Rhodes sat quietly, observing the shifting energy around him. The passengers were uneasy, their subtle glances at the front of the plane telling him everything he needed to know. Word had spread fast. Even those who hadn't witnessed the incident firsthand had heard enough. The tension in the cabin was palpable. Nathan Carter, seated nearby, let out a quiet chuckle. She's panicking now, you can see it. Kalen didn't respond immediately. Instead, he ran a hand along the handle of his cane, his fingers tracing the grooves that had become as familiar to him as the back of his own hand. He had seen people break under pressure before. Veronica was no different. She would crumble just like the others. Nathan leaned in slightly, his voice low. I have to ask, why didn't you shut her down the moment she questioned you? Kalen tilted his head slightly, his gaze drifting toward the front of the cabin. Because people like her only learn one way. Nathan smirked, nodding in understanding. By losing everything. Kalen didn't smile. He simply exhaled, his eyes sharp, unwavering. By being forced to face who they really are. A few rows ahead, Lena Whitmore turned in her seat, her voice curious. Do you think she'll actually see it? The truth? Kalen's eyes softened slightly, but his voice remained steady. That depends on what happens next. He shifted in his seat, his posture relaxed, yet his mind was sharp. This isn't just about punishment. This is about whether Veronica Hale can face the truth, or whether she'll keep running from it. As the flight continued, the mood in first class had changed. It was no longer just a cabin filled with passengers. It had become a stage. The audience, they were waiting to see if Veronica's reign over this cabin would crumble before their very eyes. Kalen remained still, his body relaxed, but his mind raced, calculating the next moves, his gaze sharp. He had been in countless situations where patience meant survival, where the only way to win a battle was to let the enemy destroy themselves. This wasn't combat, but the principles remained the same. All he had to do was wait. Meanwhile, Nathan Carter leaned back in his seat, swirling his drink with a small, knowing smile. You know, I've been in business a long time, and there's something I've learned about people like her. Kalen raised an eyebrow. They don't think they can lose until it's too late. Kalen exhaled slowly. It's because they've never had to face real consequences. Lena Whitmore shifted in her seat, her voice lowering slightly. I still can't believe she hit you. She really thought she could get away with it. Kalen's gaze flickered toward the curtain that separated first class from the rest of the cabin, his face unreadable. People in positions of power get comfortable. They make decisions, thinking there are no consequences. She thought I was just another passenger. He didn't need to say more. The words were enough. Nathan chuckled. And you will make her pay, won't you? Kalen didn't answer. He didn't need to. The bustling airport noise faded into white noise for Veronica as she stood outside the conference room, the chill of reality settling in. She had always carried herself with authority here, but now she was just a woman waiting for her fate to be decided. Her hands trembled as she held on to the pride built over a career enforcing rules and making life-impacting decisions. But today, she had no control. Inside, Dominic Walsh flipped through papers with detachment, and Grayson Langley barely acknowledged her. The empty chair at the head of the table was for someone she knew all too well. Callan Rhodes's deliberate footsteps echoed behind her. When he entered, his presence shifted the room, shrinking the space. Dominic wasted no time. We'll keep this brief. You're suspended without pay, pending termination. Veronica tried to keep her composure. I understand I made a mistake. Mistake? Callan interrupted, his voice filled with disappointment. You made a choice, Grayson added. Mr. Rhodes has requested you be removed from any flight assignments indefinitely. That was worse than termination. Veronica's career was over, with no severance or future. She tried to take responsibility, but Callan pressed, asking, What does taking responsibility mean to you? She hesitated before answering. It means learning from my mistakes, proving I can be better. Callan leaned in. And who are you proving that to? Veronica realized she had defined herself by control for so long, but now everything was crashing down. Grayson cut in. We're here to discuss your final exit. Callan's words were final. You don't belong in the sky, Grayson confirmed. You're permanently banned from this airline. Veronica's world shattered. There was no severance, no future, no hope of ever flying again. Dominic's dry tone added, Any attempt to falsify your record will lead to legal action. Callan ordered, Escort her out. The officers, doing their job without pity, led her away. As Veronica left the building, the weight of her fall sank in. Her uniform was no longer a symbol of power, but a heavy reminder of everything she had lost. Outside, the world moved on, indifferent to her collapse. The life she built was gone, and the silence of her downfall was deafening. Callan hadn't destroyed her, she had done it all herself.